I'm going to do a first chapter reading of Page of Swords, Chapter 1. I had the house to myself in the afternoon after school. My little brothers went to daycare, my mother was at work until 5, and I had the house all to myself for 2.5 hours. Asher Middle School was just a bit over 5 blocks away, and I walked the first 3 blocks with Evie, my best friend, another odd duck, as my mother said, walking slow and talking about the day at school. The jerks at school called Evie extra virgin, and the same boys called me Regina, which is my name all right, but they pronounce it to rhyme with vagina. Jerks, every school has them, I guess. We stand at the corner where Evie's street veered away, sometimes holding hands until Evie would nervously look up the street to her house, where her mother was likely watching the clock, timing Evie's arrival. Evie would break loose and then run up the street. "I can't be late," she'd say. I would stand looking after my friend running towards her house, a house I could never visit. "My mom only wants me to have friends that go to our church. I'll get in trouble if she finds out. I'm sorry." I turned and walked the last 2 blocks to my house, feeling worried about Evie and fury towards her mother. "Every family has to find their own way," my mother had said a few nights earlier. "She sounds like a nice girl, so they must be doing something right." This last part annoyed me, and I'd stewed on it since then. I was setting the plates and silverware on the table. My brothers were chased off to wash the top layer of grime off their little hands, and my mom was pulling a cast-iron skillet of cornbread out of the oven, her goofy red and white checked oven mitts making her look like Minnie Mouse. "That thing you said before about how they must be doing something right because Evie's such a good kid, well, I think that's wrong." I fished the wooden forks out of the drawer for the salad and then pushed one under the water in the sink and scrubbed at a bit of dried lettuce stuck between the tines. "I think Evie is just nice and that her parents had nothing to do with it. Maybe she gets it from her dad, the real dad, the one that left or something. But her mom is mean, and her stepdad is crazy, and neither of them ever do anything nice for her." I set the salad on the table and looked at the crock pot of stew that my mom had set beside the salad. "This looks great." I got the plastic bear of honey from the cupboard and put it beside the hot skillet of cornbread, which my mom had set on an old wood cutting board carved into the shape of an armadillo. I think we pretty much are who we are, like from when we're born, or maybe before. Probably before. I mean, parents teach us stuff, but I don't think Evie's parents get any credit for how nice she is. No offense. My mom looked at me, grinning at that last line, something that had become a joke between the two of us for the last few weeks, and she smiled. "I think you're right, sweetie. We talk like parents form who the kid is, that whole tabula rasa thing." I looked up at her, and I focused on the new words. It's Latin for blank slate, or literally washed slate. It means the child comes into the world like a blank page and becomes what the parents write onto them, like a lump of clay or something. It's what people thought before the whole nature versus nurture thing started, like our biology versus what happens to us once we're born. I looked at my mom, who was checking the hands of my 5-year-old brothers. She dipped her napkin into her teacup and scrubbed at a spot on Cal's thumb. I formed the words with my mouth. Tabula rasa. Table washed, rinsed. Table washed. Blank slate, unformed. I shook my head. I like the word, but I don't agree with the idea. And I don't agree with nature versus nurture thing either. I looked at my brother's hands. "Gross," I said. "Yeah, gross," my mom agreed, although I do like a dirty kid. Cal and Ben were in contact with the real world today, that's for sure. She looked closely at the thumb. "Is that blood? Did you poke yourself somehow?" Cal tugged helplessly, wanting to get to the cornbread his brother was already woofing down. "I don't know. Maybe. I don't remember. Let me go." Mom gave up and released the smeared, pudgy hand and sat down beside me. "What part of nature versus nurture don't you agree with?" she asked. I sliced out a wedge of cornbread and placed a thick pat of butter inside the steaming slice, and then poured on some honey from the little bear. I said, this looks great. Let me think for a bit. Can I have some stew? Half the bowl of stew was gone, and I was on my second wedge of cornbread when I finally said, I think there's more somehow. I argued this with Mrs. Bellamy in my science class. She says that our genes are what we start with and that our experience shapes us into who we are, but I don't think so. I took another bite of stew, managing to fit a piece of meat, a piece of carrot, and a bit of potato onto my spoon. I talked with Mrs. Calhoun in the library, and she sort of called Mrs. Bellamy a meathead, not meanly or anything, because I think they're friends, but she said science people are always trying to see things in terms of meat and chemicals. She called it the give a small boy a hammer thing, like science is their hammer, the science people. And they want to use science to explain everything, but it doesn't feel right to me, or Mrs. Calhoun either. She said that she has a twin, not like Cal and Ben, but a real twin, like identical, a sister who looks exactly like her, and that she and her twin were as different as night and day. Always have been. I think they were just born different people, even though they have the same genes and everything. Mrs. Calhoun thinks that too. I picked up my bowl and scraped the last bits of stew out, and then handed the bowl back to my mom. Can I have some more? She took the bowl and filled it up halfway with stew and handed it back. Nature, nurture, and spirit, she said. I think spirit calls the shots pretty much. I think I'm pretty much the same little girl I've always been, back in the time of the dinosaurs. And you, Queenie, I think you've always been pretty much the same too. Only taller now and with a better vocabulary. I can't imagine that I somehow made you who you are, other than me and your dad just giving you a chariot of sorts to cruise around in. I remember when we met you, you were already you. I grinned at the nickname bestowed by my dad when I was just a few minutes old, resulting in my name, Regina. It means queen. I smiled. You know, I used to actually think you had grown up with the dinosaurs from you saying that all the time. I used to picture you riding around on a stegosaurus dressed like the Flintstones. I believed that pretty much until I was 10 or something. And you're not even really that old. Mom nixed another piece of cornbread for Ben until his stew was gone, prompting a howl and the spoon splashing out some of the stew as he slammed it down. Done is fine too, said Mom, who never did the tantrum thing with her kids, taking the bowl and the plate up and heading towards the sink. She turned back to me. Dishes or bath time? She asked. I'll do the dishes, I said, gathering up the other plates from the table. Evie's mom still watches her take a bath or a shower, I guess. It's creepy. Well, maybe they just like to chat, said my mom. No. She just watches to make sure Evie doesn't do it wrong, I guess, or something. Evie hates it. I stacked the scraped dishes in the sink and added a squirt of dish soap and turned on the hot water. I slid the silverware into the water in the front and started on the first salad bowl. Maybe it's not my business, but her mother is crazy and mean too. I think Evie gets hit a lot. Not because she said it, but she seems scared all the time. She runs home, really runs, so she won't be late. I worked my way through the bowls and plates and then slid in the skillet and the liner from the crock pot. I just worry about her is all. Mom began to herd the boys down the hallway, but stopped. I started to say it's not your business, that being a parent is hard and that every family finds their own way. But instead, I think you ought to keep listening and help her tell someone, like a counselor at school or something, if she isn't safe. Mr. Grumman is worthless, I said. When Terry told him she was getting felt up by her stepdad, Grumman said that she was imagining it. She told Mrs. Calhoun, and Mrs. Calhoun called the police. Stepdad went to jail because it was true. Well, maybe she can tell Mrs. Calhoun then. I've got to get these guys in the tub. Could you bag the rest of the salad? Mom caught Ben as he tried to run back for another piece of cornbread, which I was slipping into a plastic bag. Nope, a tantrum is the end of a meal, she said. Maybe you can have that for breakfast. Now scoot. She moved him down the hallway. I'm ready for these little monsters to be in bed, she turned back. Did anyone know that she told Mr. Grumman and what he said? I shook my head. I don't think so. I hung the cast iron pan back on the hook. Do you think we should have told someone? Probably, she said, disappearing into the bathroom. I wiped the tabletop off and set my book bag on it. I untied the top and dug out my homework, some history and a bit of math, and then turned on the kitchen radio, which my mother had set to the local classical station. I left it there and heard something vaguely familiar, kind of tender and yearning, with flutes and what sounded like clarinets, passing the melody back and forth. Good homework music, I decided. Not too much going on and not so familiar as to be boring. A pot of tea would be next, so I filled the kettle and put it on the stove. I got out my favorite cup, a travel souvenir we got in South Carolina that showed a little girl riding an alligator, and my mom's favorite cup as well, which had a woman on a throne, all overgrown with green vines and creatures, the Queen of Wands. I had math, 22 problems requiring basic algebra, but buried in stories. Find the required equation and then solve. I did just that, why mostly I thought about the music. Sad at times, wistful, and beautiful. I listened at the end, hoping the woman who did the evening music would name the piece, but instead a second piece came on. Music I thought from a movie I'd seen a long time ago. Dances with Wolves, maybe? By the time Mom came back, having bathed, brushed, and read to the boys, I was done with math and well into my history assignment, a battle review of the French and Indian Wars with little attention paid to the differences between the French settlers' relationship with the natives and those of the English settlers. 12 questions at the end of the chapter, all answered with bolded sections of the previous text. A no-brainer. I hated this kind of assignment, but I did it anyway. History had been spoiled for me by my 5th grade teacher, a great teacher who brought the meaning and puzzles of the past into the classroom every day. Tea, Mom said. Thank you. She took a book from the little table in front of the couch and brought it into the kitchen where I was working. She settled back in her chair, leaving the book closed on front of her. Kitchen looks nice, thank you. She took up her mug and held it in her hand, staring at the picture of the leafy queen and breathing in the steam. I said nothing and continued to work my way through the tiresome problems. So little scope for the imagination, I thought, quoting one of my favorite characters. I worked steadily through the next 6 problems of the chapter and then quickly reviewed the work. I found everything shipshape, tucked the answer sheet into the text, and replaced my book bag for tomorrow. Couch, I asked. We got up from the hard wooden chairs around the scarred table and settled onto either end of the old couch, our feet and legs intertwining, our cups of tea on the table. The music from the radio in the kitchen reached the tiny living room, and I felt myself shift into a deeper, happier place. I was reading an old favorite, one my mom had shared with me, the story of a single dad and his 2 kids, traveling cross-country in search of the oldest son, who was on the run after the murder of 2 other boys. I love the writing in the book, with some of the best descriptions ever, full of ongoing miracles and a topsy-turvy sense of right and wrong that the book offered, making the reader wonder what was true as they read. I wiggled my toes, which I guess I have done since I discovered I had toes, wiggled them at my mom at the other end. My mom took a hand from her book and held my feet, rubbing them softly, saying, "Stinky little puppies, how we love them." It's weird. This makes me so happy I can hardly stand it. I sighed and wiggled my toes some more. I don't know why this makes me so happy, I said. I guess it's because we've been doing it forever. It's my favorite part of the day. Mom kept reading, but she smiled. Your dad and you first, and then me, since the time of the dinosaurs, she said. It's my favorite, too. This is what I look forward to during the day. She looked up at the book I was reading. That's such a good book. I may have to borrow it back when you're through with it. Scariest bad guy ever, pretty much. And maybe the best good guy since Atticus. And such a great girl. She reminds me a little of you. I said, feeling over-complimented. I don't type. I started another chapter and traveled along the frozen highways of North Dakota, peering through the heavy windshield wipers as they fought against the thick snow, the gas gauge somehow never dipping into empty. A light up ahead, I smiled, knowing what waited for the family and me at the closed gas station. But I couldn't concentrate. I set the book on the table, my place marked with tickets from the local baseball game last spring. I sipped my tea and I could feel my brow wrinkle with worry. "Do you think Evie's okay?" I asked. My mom finished the paragraph she was in, then closed her book as well and set it on the table. "What do you think?" she asked. She does that a lot. It's kind of annoying sometimes, but it does help you think. I thought about the question. She looks great on the outside, not like one of those kids you'd worry about. Nice clothes, clean, her teeth brushed. And she never says anything about being hurt at home. She doesn't do that flinchy thing that Lisa did. And the Prices have a lot of money, or her stepdad, Mr. Price, does anyway. Nice house, nice cars, she gets good grades, she never misses school hardly, and she never gets in trouble at school. So the teachers all think she's fine. Better than fine, really, except that her mom doesn't let her take some of the classes. The evolution part of biology is this year and all the sex ed stuff. She has to go to the library when they teach that and do homework, I guess. And she can't change out for PE with the other girls. She has to do it herself in the nurse's bathroom. Her mom wants her to be modest, I thought. But she's really scared sometimes, like when she has to go home. And she hates Friday because her stepdad goes over all of her behavior for the week. Her mother marks it down on the calendar: sassiness, being late, not keeping her room clean enough, staying too long in the bathroom. And I think she gets in trouble if one of the younger kids does something wrong, her brother and sister, because she's like supposed to set an example or something. So she gets punished if they fight with each other or something. Her mother lets her stepdad call the shots, even though he isn't her real dad. And she can't ever go to anyone's house except the folks in her church. And she can't ever have company. And I don't think the kids can talk at the dinner table unless they're asked a question or something. Dinner sounds awful. Mom squeezed my feet. "That sounds pretty bad. Have you talked to Evie about it? Or maybe Mrs. Calhoun? Sounds like you feel like you need to do something." Mom finished her tea and looked at the clock. "I've got 9 patients tomorrow, including 2 admissions, so I better get to bed. I might be late getting home. You going to be okay tomorrow?" I thought about the question. Okay with my worries about Evie? Okay with being home alone for a while? I smiled. "Yeah, I'll be okay. I'll talk with Evie tomorrow. I kind of like being by myself in the afternoons. I might go over to the library, maybe." I thought about it for a bit. I wish Evie could come over. But her mom would never say yes. "Well, no company while I'm gone anyway." My mom looked at me and smiled, and she bent down and squeezed my feet. "I love you," she said. "I love you too, Mom. Sweet dreams." I watched her walk down the hall. I thought about my dad, dead now 3 years, and wondered what my life would be like if he was still alive. Still good, I knew, but different. The sadness I shared with my mom would be gone. Would I miss that? I realized that I couldn't imagine a different life. I sighed and turned back to the book. The old Plymouth chugging along through the snowstorm, the faint light in the distance where love and comfort waited. I love that book. That was chapter 1 of Page of Swords. Great kids in this one.